official in Libya's interim government says the burial of former leader Muammar Gaddafi has been delayed for a few days. Oil Minister Ali Sahouni says arrangements for the location of the gravesite are still being made. Crowds in Tripoli celebrated through the night following the news of Gaddafi's death at the hands of opposition fighters in his hometown of Sirte.
Surprise really that Gaddafi ended in this way. The fact that he had to be dragged out of a storm drain before he was killed, I don't think is going to help, shall we say, a Gaddafi myth for the future.
Well, Oliver Miles was saying that he didn't think it was that important whether the facts were that Gaddafi had been summarily killed, executed, or had been caught in the crossfire. But interestingly, in the last few minutes, we've just heard that the United Nations Human Rights Office has called for a full investigation into the death of Gaddafi. It's unclear how he died. There is a need for an investigation. That's the human rights spokesman Rupert Colville speaking in Geneva.
We'll have more details on that as soon as we get them. We'll bring them to you. Now, Hillary Clinton has said that Gaddafi's death marks the start of a new era for the Libyan people and that the United States is committed to supporting them.
The US Secretary of State visited Tripoli on Tuesday. She's now in the Pakistani capital. Let's go to our correspondent Kim Gathas, who's travelling with her. She joins us from Islamabad. So, commitment, support for Libya. I suppose they could start by releasing some of those frozen funds that they still hold.
Well, in fact, most of the funds have been unfrozen, and it's the Libyans who are taking their time withdrawing money from those bank accounts because they want to make sure that there isn't a lot of money floating around in Tripoli and that any money that they draw is drawn against specific expenses, specific bills that need to be paid. So, for example, of the $1.5 billion that have been unfrozen, the US is telling us that only some 700,000, if I'm not mistaken, have been drawn so far. So the Libyans could presumably draw even more if they wanted to, but they've decided to do it one step at a time to make sure that the money doesn't get lost in the chaos that is still present in Libya. The fact that this isn't a permanent government but an interim authority is something that the TNC officials are very aware of, and they want to make sure that the process remains transparent and that no money disappears.
Kim Gathas in Islamabad, thank you very much.
Well, let's get more on this now. Our colleague Philippa Thomas is at the Libyan embassy in central London for us this morning, and she joins us now with the latest reaction there. Philippa, very good morning to you.
Good morning. It's almost the morning after a party. There were quite a few celebrations here last night. They've just been clearing up the sweet wrappers, a little bit of the debris from the numbers who came here to make their feelings known last night, and we're likely to have another gathering today, we're hearing. Let me just introduce you to Salem Bader, who is a volunteer here at the embassy. What was it like last night?
Oh, marvelous. Was so surprised. A lot of Libyan people here. They came and celebrate the end of the dictator in our lovely country, and all the families actually joined us here and Edgware Road last night as well till 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was really nice to celebrate the death of the big dictator in this whole life.
Why was this so much more important than, you know, the moment when Tripoli fell? Do you think there were still people who were afraid he might come back?
Yes, actually, we had very sad story for more than 4 decades, and every day, every night, it's a like nightmare for Libyan people. And Gaddafi, he was, I don't know how to describe him. If I say he was very bad devil, it's not enough. And
Salem, do you have family still in Libya?
Sorry?
Do you still have family in Libya?
Yes, I do. Yes, alhamdulillah. I've got my mom and my brothers and sisters over there.
Have you heard from them in the last 24 hours?
Yes. Yes. I phoned my mom to say, to say alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mighty God, has taken all the trouble, all the, bad image we have since, long time. We kept it in our heart. And thanks to God, everything now, inshallah, will be, everybody will be happy and peace come back to Libya.
Let me ask you one more question about the work that has to be done now, because there's the question of rebuilding Libya, and there's a lot of work to be done, surely, inside this embassy in London, yeah?
Yes, I believe everything will be fine and marvelous if we have the good intentions Libyan people that they have now to establish and to rebuild the country in place of modernization and fair to everybody.
Salem Bader, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate that. I should say we literally just grabbed Mr. Bader as he was on his way to work at the embassy, and that was very gracious of you to talk to us. And everybody we've talked to going in, one other diplomat we saw going in this morning just said it's like Christmas. They all looked a little bit shocked, I think, at what's happened, and we are expecting to hear more from the ambassador here later today. Back to you.
Has been Gaddafi's favourite son.
Gaddafi's second wife, Safia, fled to Algeria when the NATO airstrikes began. She was married to the former leader for more than 40 years. She's the mother of 7 of his children.
41-year-old Mohammed also fled to Algeria. He's the only son of Gaddafi's first wife and was head of the Libyan Olympic Committee.
Well, Saadi Gaddafi is a former footballer who played in Italy's professional leagues. The 38-year-old fled to Niger last month.
Another Gaddafi son, Hannibal, also fled with his wife to Algeria. He was arrested in Geneva in 2008, accused of assaulting his servants.
Well, 3 of the sons are known to have died in fighting. 34-year-old Muatasim, who was an army officer, was killed yesterday alongside his father.
29-year-old Saif al-Arab was killed in a NATO airstrike in April.
While the youngest son, Khamis, who led his own notorious army brigade, the Khamis Brigade, was killed during fighting in the fall of Tripoli.
Gaddafi's daughters are thought to have left Libya. Aisha fled to Algeria with her mother earlier this year.
Mystery surrounds the whereabouts of the adopted daughter Hannah. She was said to have been killed as an infant in an American airstrike back in 1986. It emerged this summer, though, that she may have lived and trained as a doctor in Tripoli. Well, let's just look at some of the historical legacy the manner of Colonel Gaddafi's death might leave. We're joined on the line by the historian Anthony Beaver. Anthony Beaver, he always said he would die in Libya, he would fight to the end. The fact that he has been killed in what looks like a summary execution, is that something which is important, do you think, for this revolution, to physically see this process and now to move on?
Well, I think it's a great help to Libya that he was killed rather than taking a long time to find him and then putting him on trial, as was the case with Saddam Hussein. I mean, it's a huge advantage to Libya. It's not a great advantage to historians, because obviously there would have been a lot of information which would have been worthwhile or interesting, which would have come out during the trial. But I think that's only that's a small price to pay. Certainly for Libya, it's the vital cut-off point. But I think one really does see the way that the fall of a dictatorship is always hugely significant and says a lot about the regime itself.
Yes, and the brutality of it. And it immediately struck me, I made a parallel with Ceausescu at the end of the revolution there. Also, if you go back further than that, what happened to Mussolini as well, the brutal end to a brutal dictator, those are the things which really just sort of stick in people's minds, don't they, about the just ignominy of their death at the end of this all.
Well, absolutely, and what was interesting was that at the end of the Second World War, when Albert Speer was interrogated by the Americans, he complained about this emphasis of history always emphasizes terminal events. And I don't think this is surprising in a way, because the downfall of any regime, in fact, is usually hugely revealing. Their earlier achievements, or what Speer regarded as their earlier achievements, are of course unlikely to be overlooked. But one then remembers with the, shall we say, the bloodiness of their death, one certainly remembers the bloodiness of their rule. And I don't think that there was any surprise, really, that Gaddafi ended in this way. The fact that he had to be dragged out of a storm drain before he was killed, I don't think is going to help, shall we say, a Gaddafi myth for the future.
When you look, though, at what happens following the death of a dictator, statistically, countries that have been through this process don't always fare that well, do they, in terms of civil war and things like that?
No, there's obviously going to be initial unity that may fall apart, it may deteriorate into civil war. But on the whole, the indications in Libya are pretty encouraging. I think, as John Simpson was saying, other countries one could see, shall we say, far bitterer legacies, particularly deeper splits. Obviously, one can never predict the future in this particular way, but the whole nature of a dictatorship, and certainly one which has lasted, in this case, 42 years, has suppressed the people so much that it doesn't exactly help the creation of democracy straight away.
As a historian, though, you must have been fascinated, weren't you, by Gaddafi, this maverick, this clown, this man who seemed to sort of always remain in power, and then finally had this rapprochement with the West, which everyone seemed to call wrong in the end.
Yes, I'm sure that Tony Blair cringes every time that clip of him embracing Gaddafi is shown on television. I think that one does have to stop with dictators with very, very long spoons indeed, and I think that people will be rather more cautious in the future in that particular way. I mean, basically, Gaddafi was not going to change his spots. I mean, it was purely tactical, the way that he pretended that he was going to help with the war against terror. And I think that rather deflected some of the judgment, if you like, of Western leaders at the time.
Anthony Beaver, I'm afraid we must leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning here on BBC News.
Just got another line coming out of Libya, this according to the Reuters news agency. We're told that Colonel Gaddafi's body will be treated with dignity and buried according to Muslim rites. That is according to an NTC brigade commander, and that comes, as I say, from Reuters. This comes in response to that news that emerged from Libya a little bit earlier on, that Colonel Gaddafi's body would not be buried today in accordance with Islamic law, but is going to be kept in a frozen container for the next few days while they decide on exactly where they're going to bury him and what they're going to do with him. The Libyan official says also that the burial won't take place for a few days because they're waiting for a third party to come in from the outside, in this instance they say from the International Criminal Court, to just verify all the paperwork.